The lock had been changed while I was at the hospital. I know that because my key wouldn't turn. I stood on the front porch for about 40 seconds trying it again, then again, the way you do when your mind refuses to accept what your hands already know. The porch light was off. My daughter in law had turned it off. I could see the flicker of the television through the living room curtains, so someone was home. Someone was definitely home. I knocked. She opened the door about 6 inches and looked at me the way you look at a salesman you've already decided to send away. "You're going to need to find somewhere else to stay," she said. "I want to be careful here because I've had 2 years to think about that moment, and I've learned that the version of a story you tell in anger is never quite the same as the version you tell when you've had time to sit with it. So I'll just say this. I had spent the previous 11 days at Mercy General, 3 floors up, in a room that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air, watching my son recover from a procedure that had a real chance of going wrong. I had slept in a recliner. I had slept in a recliner. I had eaten from vending machines. I had held his hand when he was scared and pretended not to cry when the doctor used words I didn't want to hear. And when I came home, my daughter in law had changed the lock. My name is Bernard. I'm 63 years old. I worked 31 years as a civil engineer for the county, retired 4 years ago, and I've spent most of my adult life trying to be a decent man in the quiet, unremarkable way that doesn't get you much attention but lets you sleep at night. I'm telling you this not to make myself sound like a saint, because I'm not. I've made plenty of mistakes, but the story I'm about to tell you is not a story about my mistakes. My son's name is Thomas. He was 41 when all of this happened. He married Renata, his wife, my daughter in law, 11 years before. I'll be honest, I never fully understood what Thomas saw in her, but I also understood that it wasn't my place to say so. She was sharp, quick with a cutting remark, and had a particular gift for making you feel that whatever you just said was slightly stupid. But Thomas loved her, and she gave me 2 grandchildren. I would walk too far for, so I kept my opinions to myself and showed up for every birthday and every Thanksgiving and smiled. When Thomas got his diagnosis, a cardiac issue, correctable but serious, Renata handled it the way she handled most things that inconvenienced her. She made it briefly about herself, then pivoted to logistics. She had a real estate business to run. She had clients. She had, it turned out, a man she'd been seeing for the better part of a year. A fact that would surface later in the kind of ugly sideways way these things always do. Thomas asked me to be there for the surgery. He didn't ask his wife. I thought that was odd at the time. I understand it better now. I drove down to Portland on a Sunday, checked into a motel, and was at the hospital by 6 the next morning. Thomas was calmer than I expected, which either meant he'd made his peace with things or that the medication had kicked in. Probably both. We talked for a long time the night before the procedure, about his mother who passed 8 years ago, about the kids, about a fishing trip we'd taken when he was about 14 up in Montana, when we both got so lost that we ended up eating crackers for dinner and laughing about it by a creek that turned out to be the most beautiful place I've ever been in my life. He said, "Dad, if something goes wrong." I said, "Nothing's going wrong." He said, "But if it does, the kids." I said, "I know." He said, "I've already handled some things. You'll find out." I didn't know what that meant then. I thought he was talking about a will, about insurance, about the ordinary paperwork a responsible man puts in order when he's facing something serious. I told him not to talk like that, and we went back to talking about that creek in Montana and the crackers and how his mother would have laughed at us. The procedure took 6 hours. I sat in a waiting room with a man who was doing a crossword puzzle and a woman who was knitting something blue, and I drank 4 cups of bad coffee and didn't touch the magazine I brought. When the surgeon came out and said it had gone well, I had to sit down. My knees just went. The knitting woman handed me a tissue without a word, and I thought, that is the kindness of strangers. That is something nobody talks about enough. Thomas was in recovery for 5 days before they moved him to a regular room. Renata came on the second day, stayed for about 90 minutes, and left before dinner. She came again on the fifth day. In between, I was there. Every day, I read to him when he was bored. I argued with him about baseball when he was feeling better. I talked to the nurses and asked the questions and made sure somebody who loved him was in that room. He came home on a Tuesday. I drove him. Renetta was at work. I stayed to help him settle, make sure he was comfortable, get him set up on the couch with the remote and something to eat. His daughter, my granddaughter. She's 9 and she has her father's eyes and her great grandmother's stubbornness. Came home from school and climbed up next to him and put her head on his arm with a care that made me have to look away for a second. His son, 12, shook his grandfather's hand like a small, serious businessman and then went to his room, which is exactly what his father would have done at 12. I said goodbye to Thomas around 4 in the afternoon and drove back to my house, which is about 40 minutes north in a town called Millhaven, where I've lived for 26 years. I was tired in the way that goes past your body and into something deeper. I wanted my own bed and my own kitchen and a cup of coffee I'd made myself. I turned my key and the key didn't turn. After Renata told me I needed to find somewhere else to stay, I asked if Thomas knew about this. She said Thomas was resting and I needed to not upset him. I asked again. She started to close the door. I put my hand on the frame, not to stop her, just I didn't know what to do with my hands. I said, Renata, I've been sleeping in a recliner for 11 days. My things are in that house. She said, I'll have your bag on the porch in the morning. I slept in my car that night, parked in the lot of a Walgreens 2 blocks away. I'm 63 years old. I slept in my car. I want to tell you what I did not do. I did not bang on the door. I did not call the police, though looking back, I had every right to, because I had been a regular and documented resident of that house during Thomas's recovery, and you cannot simply change a lock and turn a person out that way. I know that now. At the time, I was too tired and too stunned and too worried about upsetting Thomas to think clearly. I just sat in the Walgreens parking lot and watched the lights go off in the store, and then sat in the dark and thought about my son 3 blocks away on a couch, not knowing his father was sleeping in a car. I called my friend, a man I've known since we were both young engineers at the county, a man whose opinion I trust more than almost anyone's, and told him what had happened. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Bernard, come here. I said it was late. He said, get in the car and come here. I drove to his house and he and his wife put me in the guest room and didn't ask me too many questions, which was the right thing to do. In the morning, his wife made eggs and strong coffee and sat with me while I tried to figure out what to do next. I found out what Thomas had meant about handling some things about 3 weeks later. I had moved back to Millhaven by then. I had my own home, thank God. A modest place, a 3 bedroom on a quiet street with a backyard I've been meaning to do something with for years. My late wife planted roses along the back fence 20 years ago, and I've kept them going ever since because it would feel wrong not to. I was sitting on the back porch on a Saturday morning, coffee, the newspaper, the roses, when the phone rang. It was a law firm out of Portland. A woman with a calm, professional voice asked if I was Bernard Calloway. I said I was. She said she was calling on behalf of a matter related to a trust established by my son, Thomas Calloway, and that she'd like to schedule a time for me to come in and review the documentation. I asked her what trust. She said it was a trust Thomas had established for my benefit and for the benefit of his children, and that it had been structured specifically to protect certain assets from being accessible to anyone else. She said it in the careful, neutral way lawyers have, but what she meant was clear enough. Thomas had seen this coming. He had seen it before the surgery, maybe before that, and he had done what he could to protect what mattered. I drove to Portland on a Wednesday morning and sat in a conference room with a view of the Willamette River. The woman from the phone was younger than I expected, and sharp in the good sense, the kind of person who's thought 3 steps ahead and is just waiting for you to catch up. She walked me through it slowly and clearly. Thomas had worked for 22 years as a software architect. Over that time, quietly, without making a show of it, he had accumulated a portfolio of investments and had, 2 years earlier, purchased 41 acres of land in the Cascade foothills east of Hood River. He'd told no one, not Renata, not me. He had paid for it through a separate account Renata didn't know about and had it appraised and held it and said nothing. He had structured a trust that placed this land and the associated investments under independent management with specific provisions for his children's education and for my retirement security outside the reach of any divorce proceedings. The land was worth at current valuation just under $2 million. I sat with that for a long moment. The woman across the table let me. I thought about Thomas of 14, eating crackers by a Montana creek, laughing until his sides hurt. I thought about him at the surgery prep asking me about the kids and saying, I've already handled some things. I thought about him on that couch with his daughter's head on his arm. My son had been planning this the way you plan for a storm. Not with drama, not with confrontation, just with quiet, steady preparation. He protected his children. He protected his children. He protected me. And he'd done it all without saying a word about it. I cried a little in that conference room. I'm not ashamed of that. I signed the documents that needed signing. The attorney said she'd be in contact about next steps and asked if I had any questions. I had about 100, but mostly I just wanted to go home and sit in my backyard and look at the roses and think. Renata found out 2 days later. Thomas told me about it that evening when he called. He was matter of fact about it, the way he gets when he's thought something through completely and has nothing left to be nervous about. He said she had called the trust attorney's office. She had called their bank. She had called apparently a family lawyer she'd had on standby, who informed her that a properly structured trust established before a separation is generally protected from divorce claims, particularly when no marital funds were used in its creation. Thomas said she called him after that she cried, that she'd said she'd made a mistake, and she wanted to work things out. I asked what he said to her. He was quiet for a second, and then he said, I told her I hope she finds what she's looking for. That was it. No anger, no cruelty, just a door closing quietly. Renata moved out the following month. She took what was hers and left. The man she'd been seeing, a contractor who'd done some work on their kitchen 2 years back, had already ended things with her by then. I heard that secondhand, and I won't pretend I wasn't a little satisfied, but mostly I felt sad, the way you feel sad when something is broken that could have been different. The children stayed with Thomas. That was not a court order. That was Renata's choice, and it is the choice I have the hardest time forgiving because, whatever her failures as a wife, those are still her children. But that was her decision to make. Thomas healed. It took longer than he expected, but he healed. By spring, he was doing short hikes. By summer, he was talking about the land and the Cascades, about what his grandfather might have done with it if he'd had it, about building something that would last. He and I drove out there together in June, a long drive on a clear day, and stood at the edge of the property where you could see the mountain from a certain angle. And he said he wanted to put a cabin on it, maybe host something for kids who'd never been in those woods, who'd never stood anywhere that quiet, something that would be there after he was gone. I thought about my own father, who died when I was in my 40s, and what he would have said about that. My father was a man who measured twice and cut once and never raised his voice except once, when I was in high school and made a decision I'm still embarrassed about. And even then, he kept his voice level and asked me what I thought I owed the people I'd let down. He wasn't a famous man. He didn't do anything that would make the news. But I've tried to be like him my whole life, and I think Thomas is trying the same thing with his own father in mind, and that is the closest thing to legacy that I understand. I live in Millhaven still. The roses are doing well this year, better than they have in a while. I think it might be the rain we got in April. My granddaughter calls me every Sunday. She wants to hear stories about her dad when he was her age, and I tell them to her. I can hear her laugh the way her father laughed, and I think about that creek in Montana and the crackers and the darkness that felt, by the end, like something peaceful rather than something lost. My son is alive. My grandchildren are safe. The land in the Cascades is ours. I slept in a parking lot for one night. Some people would say I should have done something about that, should have fought harder, should have made more noise. Maybe, but I've lived long enough to know that the loudest response is rarely the one that holds up over time. Thomas didn't fight loud either. He just built something solid, quietly before the storm arrived. And when the storm came, everything that mattered was already safe. I still think about that Walgreens parking lot sometimes, not with bitterness, that surprised me, but with a kind of clarity you can only get when everything has been stripped away and you're sitting in the dark with nothing left to do but think. What I've come to understand is that what happened to me, what happened to Thomas, what happened to Renata, none of it was random. People make choices, and choices build on each other, the way water cuts a channel in stone. You don't see the channel forming, You just wake up one day and the water has nowhere else to go. Renatza made her choices. Small ones at first, probably. A little dishonesty here, a little contempt there, the slow decision to stop caring about the man she promised to stand beside. And then one day, those small choices had become the kind of person who changes the locks on her father in law while their husband is recovering 3 blocks away, who turns out a 63-year-old man into a November night and doesn't lose a minute of sleep over it. That's not a sudden thing. That's a long accumulation. And what comes back to you is always proportional to what you've been building, quietly, without realizing it. Thomas built something too, quietly over years with the kind of patience and foresight that I think most people mistake for luck when they see the results. He didn't rage, he didn't threaten, he just thought clearly about what mattered: his children, his father, the future he wanted to be real, and he put the right structures in place before the storm arrived. That's not cunning. That's wisdom. It's the kind of thinking that asks not just, what do I want right now, but what will I be glad I did 5 years from now? Thomas was sick, facing surgery, genuinely scared, and he still had the presence of mind to plan for contingencies that most healthy people never consider. That kind of clear headedness in a hard moment is something I don't take lightly. And then there's the part I think about most: the part about staying decent when decency isn't required and nobody's watching. I could have made noise in that parking lot. I could have gone back and pounded on that door and made it a scene the whole street remembered. I could have called Thomas right then and forced the issue and created the kind of crisis that would have set back his recovery by weeks. I chose not to, not because I'm a saint, but because I knew, somewhere below the anger and the exhaustion, that the right response to being treated badly is not to become someone who treats people badly. You hold on to who you are. You get in the car and you drive to your friend's house and you eat eggs in the morning and you keep going. My father used to say that a man's character is most visible not in his victories, but in what he does when he has every justification to act badly and chooses not to. I didn't fully understand that when I was young. I do now. The roses are blooming again. Thomas calls on Sundays. My granddaughter still wants more stories. That's enough. That's more than enough.